And on today's unbiased short take, again, as it was on our Facebook, a trilogy of short takes today. 3 short takes today. Hey, so we are breaking down the AFC and NFC South. I'm going to start with the AFC South. In my opinion, this is actually the most underrated division in football. Last year, the Texans were the surprise team in the league. They were absolutely outstanding, winning the division and winning a playoff game with rookie quarterback C.J. Stroud, and they've done nothing but get better throughout the offseason. So, Houston, I think, ultimately, I'm going to start with number 1 here, is Houston. I think, ultimately, they're going to absolutely win this division, I have no doubt, and truly, in my opinion, because they won the division last year. C.J. Stroud played phenomenal rookie ball. In my opinion, best rookie performance we've ever seen from a quarterback. On top of the fact that Tank Dell will be back. They have Nico Collins still. They added 1,000-yard rusher Joe Mixon to the mix to get some running game, which they kind of struggled with, in my opinion, last year a little bit. So they made absolute strides getting Stephon Diggs on top of Dalton Schultz, who is a top 10 underrated tight end in the NFL. Will Anderson Jr. in that defense was playing outstanding ball last year with D'Amico Ryans, who returns as head coach. And they drafted our tackle in the 3rd round, Blake Fisher, to provide extra protection for C.J. Stroud. They are the real deal, and I think could very well be maybe the team to possibly break the Chiefs' reign in the AFC. I think they're a very strong candidate for that. So I'm going to go the Houston Texans at 1. I think C.J. Stroud will have an outstanding season. Stephon Diggs will find new breath in Houston. They're a title contender. They're truly a Super Bowl contender in Houston. They could very well be the 2nd best team in the AFC. I'll announce that later right before the season starts, when me and JB do our playoff predictions. So we'll save that for a later date, but I think Houston ultimately is the best team in this division. And then number 2, I kind of went back and forth between the Colts and the Jags because 3 of these teams last year had winning records out of the 4. So this isn't a horrible division, guys. So I'm looking here at... Initially, I had the Colts here, but I think actually I'm going to go Jacksonville to bounce back because they started out 8-3 last year, and Trevor Lawrence started out hot, but then he regressed hard in that second half of the season. The only team they beat in the second half of the season was the Panthers, and the Panthers were easily the worst team in the entire league last year. We'll talk about them later. So they stumbled. They did lose Calvin Ridley. But the biggest question for me truly is, can Trevor Lawrence bounce back from the late struggles? He had a couple injuries late in the season, really didn't miss a lot of time. But they did hire a new defensive coordinator and to replace Mike Caldwell, and did add Eric Armstead to boost the defense. Their offense looks really, really good. The defense needed major improvement. I think Jacksonville will be fighting for a wild card spot. I expect them, again, I think Houston will win about 12 games. I think Jacksonville's looking at maybe 9-10. I think they'll be a winning team. They'll be fighting for the playoffs, but the AFC's tough. So I think they'll be fighting for a playoffs at the 2nd in that division. Number 3 at about 8 wins, possibly 9. I have the Indianapolis Colts. They lost Zach Moss, who was a big fresh air breath into the running game last year with Jonathan Taylor's injuries and contract holdouts and all that weird trade demands, this weird stuff that was going on. So they don't really have a good backup to Jonathan Taylor right now, and he has an injury history. So is Anthony Richardson. I'm high on Anthony Richardson. I think he's the real deal. I think possibly the Colts could be a fringe, borderline wild card 7 seed if he's healthy throughout the season. I think he's the real deal. They have Michael Pittman, Taylor if he's healthy. They have a good defense. Shane Steichen at coach. So they have some good players. They really, really do. It's just a matter of fact of can their quarterback and running back stay healthy. That's it. And with the history so far with Richardson, it says no, because last year played 4 or 5 games, something like that, and then missed the rest of the season. Then Taylor in and out of the lineup. So a lot of question marks with health. Availability is the best ability. So until I see them be healthy, I can't put them above Jacksonville. Jacksonville won a playoff game a couple years ago. Jacksonville was better than Indianapolis last season. They both finished 9-8 last year. So I think Jacksonville's still slightly better than Indianapolis here. But I think Indianapolis could be a fringe playoff team, 8-9 wins. And then number 4, I have the Titans at about 6 wins. I think they'll get a little bit better. A lot of head-scratching moves. They lost Derrick Henry, which they did sign Tony Pollard. That's a downgrade in my opinion. Though you could argue that Pollard is only 27 and much younger, and he's an 1,000-yard rusher too. They still have DeAndre Hopkins, who was an 1,000-yard receiver last year, who had 1,057 total yards. And of course, excuse me, the big thing with the Titans for me is I don't understand why they went out and fired Mike Vrabel. That absolutely made no sense to me. And then Brian Callahan, they hired him. And that defense is horrible. And they lost Autry. He was a core defensive line player for them for years and led them in sacks last year. And their defense wasn't good last year at all anyway, and they got worse. On top of the fact they lost their Hall of Fame running back, they have an older DeAndre Hopkins and a Will Levis who completed only 58% of his passes last season. And I am not a fan of Will Levis. I wasn't a fan of him in the draft a couple years ago. You can go back a couple years to our old mock drafts and go find that. I think Will Levis is a bust. I don't think Tennessee, I think it's going to be a rough year for Brian Callahan and them. They'll be a top 10 draft picking team in my opinion. So to break down the AFC South, I have Houston, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, Tennessee in that order. Moving on to the NFC South. This division is weird because this division is probably the worst division in football. It was last year, it still is this year. But I'm going to say the Falcons actually probably are going to win this division this year. They're actually the betting favorite according to Caesar Sportsbook to win the NFC South. So go looking at Atlanta here. They almost made the playoffs last year. They were in the division race till the last week of the season last year with Desmond Ridder and their atrocious quarterback play. And they went out and, of course, signed Kirk Cousins and then went out and drafted a quarterback as well in this past offseason. So that's the Michael Penix draft pick. A lot of people thought that was weird. I actually didn't, because I actually had the Falcons drafting Michael Penix in our mock draft before the draft even happened. You can go to this year's mock draft and find that, and I will prove you right on that. So I think it's actually a really good move because you're preparing for now. They have a roster to win now. Kyle Pitts has shown promise. Bijan Robinson's an outstanding player. Drake London. They have actually a decent defense. I mean, and they went out and drafted that defensive lineman from Clemson, Rook. That's right. They went and drafted him. So I think they're in an outstanding spot. They did what the Packers did with Jordan Love. They went out and got the quarterback for now. That way they can develop the guy for the future. I mean, that makes plenty of sense to me. So I think the Falcons were a quarterback away from winning this division, and I think they've absolutely gotten that quarterback. Kirk Cousins is going to be an outstanding, much better improvement over Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heineke. So I expect them to take that next step. Number 2 is the Buccaneers. I think the Buccaneers will regress a little bit, about 8 wins. They lost their offensive coordinator. That's a big thing. Because Baker Mayfield seemed to do really good in that system, and we've seen Baker Mayfield not do well in systems in the past, like the Carolina system and things of that nature. But looking at Tampa Bay, I mean, they're pretty much running it back. They still got Mike Evans, and they got Chase Edmonds back under contract to keep the offense intact, and they drafted Graham Barton with their first-round pick. So they got more production in their offensive line throughout the offseason and through signings and drafting, things of that nature. But factor into the fact that their secondary was one of the worst in the league last year. They well below average in defensive pass coverage and success rate. So I worry about their defense a little bit. Baker Mayfield's kind of had an up and down roller coaster career. They lost their offensive coordinator. I think they take a slight step back. Let's not pretend like they were powerhouses last year throughout the regular season. They just simply were the best team in the worst division. So I think Tampa Bay is the second best team in this division. Number 3 is the Saints. Saints, I'm going to say about 8 wins, 7-8 wins. They're the very definition of mediocrity. They went out and added all sorts of bunch of good defensive pieces when they got Chase Young and all that, and Willie Gay at linebacker. They got Kool-Aid McKinstry in the draft, who I'm a big fan of. The problem is that their offense stayed the same, and their offense was very stale last year. Derek Carr is the very definition of mid. And their offense didn't improve at all. Alvin Kamara is not as good as he used to be. I'm just not impressed with what the Saints can do on offense. I don't think they're going to be able to compete with Atlanta and what they have on offense, or even Tampa Bay. The Saints will score under 20 points in over half of their games this season. Very definition of mid. And that's what their record will be. They're not winning this division. I picked them last year. I'm all out on the Saints. Number 4 is the Panthers. So long as David Tepper is the owner, that will be a complete clown show. Now, I will say a lot of people, I've actually seen people have them as a wild card team, which makes absolutely no sense because, once again, they didn't have a first-round draft pick because of the Bryce Young trade, and Bryce Young looked absolutely abysmal last season. I mean, they went out and got DeAndre Johnson. I mean, Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis will be good additions as well. But this team is far from contending. They drafted Jonathan Brooks, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because there's question marks if he'll even be ready for the season. So he's coming off an ACL injury. I'm just not. There's a lot of head-scratching moves. Their owner throws drinks on fans and goes into restaurants and harasses employees. They fire their coach after at least once a year. It's a mess. It is a mess in Carolina. I expect them to be contending for one of the worst teams in the league again this season. I am out on Bryce Young. I'm out on Carolina. It's a clown show. So, what do you guys think of my AFC and NFC South predictions? So, I have in the AFC South the Texans, Texans, Jaguars, Colts, Titans. And then in the NFC South, I have the Falcons, Buccaneers, Saints, Panthers. So, what do you guys think? Am I right? Am I wrong? Let me know in the comments down below and check out our other 2 videos on our trilogy of short takes on for this week. So, that's all I got. Until next week, boiler up. Let's go Heat. But most importantly, 7 days before football season starts, go Pack, go. Football's coming, guys. We'll have football to talk about here in a week or 2. I cannot wait. We will see you all next time.